Hello there, everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on Sprott Inc., which is a bit of a different type of animal, really, compared to some of the other things that I've spoken about. But I think it's interesting. I think it's worthy of a bit of a look. So let's get into what I see. Now, this is a very peculiar little company here. Um, and I would say the best way I could think of describing it is if a bank, or more particularly an asset manager, hated leverage, you'd have something a little bit like this. Okay, so one thing I want to start, or I wanted to be doing, but I don't always remember with the videos, is when I talk about an individual name, I'm going to want to make it clear if I at the time of the video am long or not. None of the videos with this background are stocks that I had positions in at the time of the video. There are some that I had bids in, um, but at the time of the video, none of the ones with this background do. This one specifically, I don't, but a family member does have a position in this one, and I just feel like it, that's probably not relevant, but having if I have a position could be relevant in how I talk about it. So looking at the valuation of this company, it's priced at about 390 million Canadian, and I'll use Canadian because that's what they do their earnings in and it's simpler. The earnings were growing really quickly from 2015 to 2017, and then they just stopped from 2017 to 2018. I understand that it was a weak year in some commodities, but that's going from a trend to off the trend. We'll see if they can get back. Now, in terms of their earnings, they these guys have some serious depreciation and amortization costs. Like their net income is just remarkably low. But I mean, if you include the EBITDA, which I really I'm not as big a fan of on companies that are outside of mining, but these guys depreciate and amortize like miners, it seems to me. Now, that being said, they have a 4.7% dividend yield, which is payable at current prices if you include the EBITDA. And I mean, EBITDA yield or free cash flow yield, if you want to call it that, is about 7% of their market cap, earning about 4 cents a quarter on a $3 or $2.45 share. So, I mean, it's reasonable, I guess. Now, one thing you'd like to see in the resource space, and here too, I guess, is if you count the legacy founders and the people that technically are insiders, they have about 30% insider ownership. Although I would think that a good chunk of that is Mr. Sprott and Mr. Rule, who I'm not sure if they still technically are insiders, but I'll give it to them. And when I was asked about this stock, the viewer who mentioned the name asked if it was a hedge, and that's a good question because it kind of depends, in my view, which way you look at it. If you have a bunch of resource stocks and then you have this as your financial, I would say no, that's not a hedge because I would say this is more like an IP commodity play, like intellectual property on commodities, that is, versus this could be a hedge if you were looking at it from wanting to have some financial exposure, but you were concerned and wanted financial exposure to have gold in it, basically. In that way, this could be a hedge. But it's really odd because this is a active, passive way to play the space because you'd be passive in that you have someone else be active, super active. So I don't know. It's interesting. And one of the main newer things they're investing in is, well, basically a different way of playing gold and digital gold in that not Bitcoin, but gold on a blockchain that you could theoretically access from one of many places around the world. Now, would the masses trust something like this? Probably. I mean, I think they would. I probably would. Now, would the gold bugs, aka the people most likely to be buying gold because they don't believe in financial institutions, would they trust this? Well, that's a different question. And I mean, it does look promising because it is supposed to be lower cost than ETFs or insuring physical gold. So that's something to watch. However, on the digital gold front, if they ever want to get the big money into it, I would think that they would need to massively close the spreads, because right now the spread between the bid and the ask is nothing that an institution or a very serious investor that wanted liquidity would go to. So they need to close the spreads and prove they have liquidity. And then I would see it as being probably better than the ETFs or GLD or anything like that. But I don't know how feasible it is to do that because it has to be backed by physical gold. And I also don't know if it's possible to make it an interface easier, like having a ticker that you could buy it on an exchange. I don't know if you'd be able to do that without increasing the cost. But those are just some views that I have on their digital gold, which is just one of their many businesses. But one of their bigger businesses, or a bigger grower at least, is their exchange traded products, their physical ETFs or ETFs of miners, on which they take a small fee. Now, the market on that type of thing is fairly saturated, but it seems that they have their little niche and they are trusted within their niche. Now, could they find some way to mix the digital gold with their exchange traded products in order to bring more volume to the digital gold? Maybe, but at the same time, I'm not sure that they'd necessarily want to because the whole thing about the digital gold is it's cheaper than ETFs, which means less fees for the companies like Sprott. The main question or the main way to look at these guys, in my view, is they're an asset manager, which means they make money on fees, fees, and fees, mostly, that is. So if their assets under management grow, well, that's more fees that they can charge to the people whose assets there are. And most of their assets are gold related companies. So that means that they're a small gold focused resource version of like a BlackRock, for example. Now, I mentioned that a good chunk of their assets are gold related things, I think I said. If you want to see where they have their clients' money, I guess, you can see on the Nasdaq's website. I mean, here's their top holdings. Most of it is pretty much what you'd expect: Wheaton Precious Metals, Kirkland Lake, Sandstorm Gold. So the lower volatility gold stocks, I guess. Pretium, I think they think it's a takeout target. Uh, Barrick, yeah. So it's the big. I mean, surprisingly, they do have Apple, and maybe they're fans of Jeremy's there because they have some serious logic. But mostly, if you go through the page, mostly resources, mostly gold. Now, whether you think this stock is cheap or expensive, the answer will probably have inverse correlation to: do you think that they are in a league of their own with their business, or do you think that they have tons of competition? Because within their own niche, they seem to be doing quite well. But if you look at the other companies like them, the ETF makers or the asset managers, they are all in a fee war taking fees lower and lower, which is absolutely fantastic for people in general, not as great for the companies that are making the ETFs and running assets. So your view on the company will probably be highly contingent on your view of if they have no or tons of competition. So in conclusion, if you think they could get their growth back on track, like they were doing in 15 to 17, and if you think the precious metals market will recover and go back and forget about this summer of 2018, then there's probably some great value here. If the precious metals market rolls back over like this summer or continues to struggle like 2015, then you might want to look elsewhere. But basically, if you like precious metals, this is probably a low beta way to play it. So it's similar to many of the stocks they own in the gold royalty companies, a lower beta way of playing precious metals. They're a different take on that, but I think that that's pretty much how I'd look at this company. So that's it for today's video. I would like to know what you guys think about Sprott. Had you heard of it? Did you listen to Rick Rule and buy some or not? Or what are your thoughts? And also, if you want to see or know my thoughts about some other specific thing, please let me know. Bear in mind, I don't know everything, not even close. I'm not familiar with all the stocks. So if you're asking for something, there's a chance that I would have to look into it myself, or I may know it, or I may know a little bit, or have a bunch of information about it. So sometimes it might not be appropriate necessarily for me to make a whole video on the thing when I just have one or two thoughts. But if there's something you want to know what I think about, feel free, leave it in the comments. I'll get to it. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you next time.